It is said that every home remembers its first fire, before walls learned to stand straight, before roofs learned the language of rain. There was a circle of stones placed carefully upon the earth. Within it, flame was invited to live, not as a conqueror, but as a guest. The fire breathed softly, fed with twigs and patience, its glow painting the chamber in amber and shadow. And beneath that fire, beneath the ash and warmth and murmured breath, something else lay waiting. A bone, or perhaps many. The question opens quietly, like a candle lifted in a sealed room. What ancestor sleeps beneath our own floorboards? In forgotten corners of the earth, long before history learned to write itself down, people lived close to their dead. Not out of fear, not out of desperation, but out of reverence. The hearth was not merely a place for heat or hunger. It was a center, a sacred chamber, a living altar where flame spoke to stone, where breath met dust, where memory rested without needing a name. Whispers tell us that in these earliest dwellings, the living and the dead shared the same breath of night. Beneath the packed earth floors of ancient shelters, bones were laid gently into the soil. Sometimes an elder, folded as if sleeping. Sometimes an infant, wrapped in care too tender to belong to a brutal world. Stone tools rested beside them, charcoal dust settled into their hollows. The fire above never stopped burning. It warmed the living, yes, but it also kept vigil. To sit by the hearth was to sit above your lineage. Firelight flickered over the unseen, dancing across the ceiling like spirits passing through. The crackle of wood carried more than sound. It carried continuity. Each flame seemed to say, "You are not alone. You were never alone." Some believe these hearths were chosen carefully, aligned with stars long forgotten, marked by the moon's slow passage. Others say the placement was simpler, guided by instinct older than language. Either way, the result was the same. The dead were not sent away. They were kept close, held within the circle of daily life. Here, a child learned to walk above the bones of a grandmother. Here, stories were spoken while ancestors listened in silence. Here, the line between breath and dust was thin and sacred. It is difficult now to imagine such intimacy. Modern minds stumble at the thought. We expect fear. We expect superstition. We expect brutality in the deep past. But when archaeologists brush away the dust, slowly, reverently, they find something else. They find care. Infant skulls placed with stones smoothed by touch, elders laid in positions of rest, not discard. Ash layers carefully renewed, not scattered. These are not signs of panic or ignorance. These are gestures of tenderness, of belonging. Beneath the silence of soil, a contradiction breathes. We were taught that early humans fled death, hid from it, feared it. Yet the hearth tells a different story. It tells of proximity, of trust, of a belief, unspoken, perhaps unnamed, that the dead still mattered, that their presence steadied the living. That memory did not need distance to survive. The hearth was a veil, not a barrier. And then, slowly, something changed. No single moment announces itself. No fire goes out all at once. The forgetting arrives the way smoke thins, gradually, almost kindly. Burials begin to move outward, just a little at first. A short walk from the fire, then farther still. Beyond the shelter, beyond the sound of voices at night, ash remains above ground. Bones are carried away. The hearth grows quiet in a way it never was before. Some say it was necessity. Growing communities, limited space. Others speak of belief shifting like a tide, new rituals forming, new fears taking shape. Perhaps death became heavier, perhaps it became something to manage rather than live beside, or perhaps remembering became too much. As societies layered upon themselves, stone upon stone, story upon story, the old closeness dissolved. The dead were given ground of their own, sacred, yes, honored, yes, but separate. The bone beneath the hearth was sealed away by memory itself. Where once fire warmed both living hands and ancestral dust, now it served only the present moment. The past was placed at a distance, revered but quieted. And yet, beneath the silence, something lingered. Archaeological layers speak in whispers, hearths built atop hearths, floors renewed again and again, as if the earth itself refused to forget what lay below. In some sites, burials remain stubbornly close, as though tradition resisted erasure, as though hands hesitated before letting go. One can almost feel it, the ache of separation never fully explained, a family standing at the threshold of change, a fire still burning, a decision made without words. From that moment on, the dead were no longer warmed by daily life. They were honored from afar, and something subtle was lost, not belief, but intimacy. The hearth cooled, not in temperature but in meaning. Where memory fades, silence takes root. Tonight, as you rest, consider the floor beneath you, the ground that holds you steady. It has known many lives, many endings, many beginnings layered like breath upon breath. You walk above histories unmarked. You sleep above questions never answered. Perhaps beneath your own hearth, wherever warmth gathers in your life, there is an echo, not a bone in the literal sense, but a presence. An inheritance of closeness we once knew, a time when the living did not fear the nearness of those who came before. It is said that progress teaches us how to move forward, but not always how to remember. Was the ancestor beneath us erased by knowledge, or by comfort, or by our growing need to believe that the past must stay buried to remain at peace? The fire does not answer, it only glows, or does not. In the end, the hearth grows cold, ash settles, stones remain, and beneath them all, dust holds its silence with patience, older than fear. Perhaps the ancestor still listens, not asking to be uncovered, only to be acknowledged. Some voices do not call out, they wait. And maybe, as sleep draws near, as your breath slows and the world softens, you are closer to them than you think. It is said that the earth keeps its own calendar. Long before dates were counted, before years learned to march in straight lines, the ground remembered time by touch, by pressure, by the slow layering of silence. And sometimes, when moonlight falls just right, when soil loosens its grip, a face returns. Imagine it now. A skull, pale as milked stone, lifted gently from the dark. Moonlight traces its curves. The brow is heavy, the jaw wide, the shape both familiar and strange. Not quite us, not entirely other. It has no name waiting for it, no song, no lineage spoken aloud. Only the quiet question of recognition. Whispers tell us this face once turned toward the same stars we do. It breathed cold night air. It listened to fire crackle inside caves painted with hands. It walked beside beings who would one day call themselves human, though that word had not yet learned to exist. The skull rests in silence, unearthed but never claimed. In forgotten corners of the earth, deep within limestone chambers, beneath veils of calcite and time, faces like this sleep by the hundreds. Neanderthal, Denisovan, and others whose names dissolved before language hardened. Their bones carry echoes of a world that ran parallel to ours, so close that footsteps overlapped, so intimate that breath mingled in the dark. It is said they were strong. It is said they were strange. It is said they vanished, but vanishing is rarely so clean. As the narrative deepens, we drift backward, not with urgency, but with reverence, into an age when humanity was not singular. When the night belonged to many kinds of people, all looking up at the same celestial ceiling, all marked by the moon in different ways. Some believe these others were shadows, monsters at the edge of firelight, figures to be feared. Yet the caves tell a gentler story. On stone walls, hands appear, stenciled in red and ochre, pressed flat against rock as if to say, "I was here." Some of those hands were not entirely ours, fingers broader, palms shaped differently, and yet the gesture is unmistakable: presence, witness, belonging. Beneath the silence of these caves, Memory breathes. Fire burned here too, carefully kept, shared. Tools were shaped with intention, not chaos. The dead were sometimes buried with care, curled like sleepers waiting for dawn. These were not beasts, these were people, though that word feels small for what they were. They hunted, they laughed perhaps, they sang perhaps. Their children slept close to warmth. Their elders aged beneath stars that have not moved since. And then, without ceremony, they faded. Or so we tell ourselves. Scientific scrolls speak softly of timelines and extinction, of climate shifts, of competition, of survival. Yet between the lines another truth hums, quieter but persistent. They did not entirely disappear, their blood still travels through us. Beneath the silence of modern skin, fragments remain. A tolerance for cold, a curve of bone, a breath shaped for ancient air. Intimacies written not in myth, but in the spiral code of inheritance, genetic closeness paired with historical erasure, a contradiction that refuses to rest. How does one mourn an ancestor whose name was never spoken? How does one grieve a face that lives on, yet is denied memory? Some believe the forgetting was deliberate. As human identity narrowed, like a doorway closing at night, there arose a need to be singular, pure, alone. Stories were shaped to place others in the dark. Monsters replaced relatives, shadows replaced kin. The old faces were pushed into myth, giants, demons, hairy creatures at the edge of the forest, echoes of encounters misunderstood by time. It is easier to fear what we refuse to recognize. And so the face without a name became a stranger. Yet the body remembers what stories erase. In the quiet chambers of breath, something stirs, a familiarity without language, a sense that we have met before. When we look into certain skulls, something inside us leans closer, not in horror, but in sorrow. The emotional arc turns here, gently, toward melancholy. Not the sharp grief of sudden loss, but the slow ache of long forgetting. Imagine standing in a cave where generations layered their lives. Firelight flickers across stone. Shadows stretch and retreat. Two kinds of people sit together, sharing warmth, sharing time. No one knows who will last. No one knows who will be remembered. Outside, snow falls. Inside, breath rises like prayer. Time, patient and unfeeling, begins its work. Millennia pass, ice retreats, forests grow, names dissolve. One lineage learns to tell the story alone, the other becomes a footnote, then a curiosity, then a shadow. And yet, the breath continues. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not how they vanished, but why we forgot so completely, why we built histories that leave no space for shared becoming, why we speak of progress as if it requires erasure. The pace slows now, words soften, the language becomes hushed, reverent. Picture the skull again, resting beneath moonlight. Its empty eyes do not accuse, they do not plead, they simply wait, as if listening for something long overdue. Recognition, not a name, not a category, just acknowledgement. It is said that some ancestors do not want monuments. They want remembrance that moves quietly through the body, through the way we breathe, through the way we stand against cold, through the instinct to gather close when darkness falls. Perhaps this face still listens, not from museums or diagrams, but from within, from the dark chamber of the self where ancient echoes sleep. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. As sleep approaches, as thought loosens its grip, you may feel it too, a soft nearness, not foreign, not frightening, just familiar in a way that bypasses words. The face without a name does not ask to be found, only to be felt, and so the skull returns to shadow. Moonlight fades. Dust settles back into its patient keeping. The cave breathes on. The stars remain unmoved. Perhaps it was never meant to be named. Perhaps remembrance does not always speak. Sometimes it simply breathes. It is said that some gates were never built to be seen. They do not rise in stone alone, nor carry inscriptions worn smooth by prayerful hands. They appear instead at the edges of awareness, half seen in dream and dust, where the world thins, and two paths breathe into one another. Imagine such a gate now. A narrow passage set between wind-worn rock, its stones pale and ancient, marked by the slow touch of time. Moonlight grazes its surface, revealing no symbols, no warnings, no names. Only an opening, only the hush of possibility. To stand before it is to feel the air change. Cooler, heavier, as if memory itself were waiting on the other side. This is the gate of interbreathing. In forgotten corners of the earth, long before borders learned to harden and identities learned to narrow, early humans moved through the world guided by seasons and stars. They crossed valleys and rivers, deserts and ice, carrying little more than fire, stories, and breath. And sometimes, quietly, without fanfare, they crossed something else. Lineages. It is said that beneath migrating stars, where night stretched wide and patient, different kinds of people shared the same dark. They gathered in the same shelters when cold pressed close. They warmed their hands at the same fires. Their breath rose together in pale clouds, mingling in the cold air like prayer. These meetings were not always brief. Footprints overlapped in wet earth. Tools were exchanged, gestures learned and mirrored. The language of survival softened into something more intimate, shared laughter, shared silence, shared sleep. In these moments, the gate opened, not as a barrier, but as a threshold. To cross it was not to abandon oneself, but to expand. Whispers tell us that these unions were once sacred, though no altar marked them, no songs were carved into stone. The ceremony was quiet, woven into daily life. Two beings, shaped differently by time, recognizing something familiar in one another's eyes. Breath meeting breath. The tone of this chapter remains meditative, almost ceremonial, because such crossings were not loud events. They did not announce themselves to history. They left no monuments, only traces, subtle and enduring, threaded into the body itself. Genetic markers remain, like prayer beads slipping silently through the fingers of time, each one a whisper of contact, a shared night beneath stars, a child born carrying echoes of two worlds. These markers are small, easy to overlook, reduced in modern telling to footnotes and percentages, yet each carries a story that was never sung. Why? Why were these crossings not carved into memory? Why do our oldest myths speak of separation rather than union, of purity rather than interweaving? The mystery deepens here as the narrative drifts towards silence. Some believe the forgetting was born of fear, that as communities grew, as numbers swelled and resources tightened, difference became something to guard against. The gate, once open and unmarked, began to feel dangerous. Stories shifted, the familiar became strange, the shared became taboo. Others speak of myth-making as a kind of shelter, a way to simplify a world too complex to hold all at once. Purity myths offered comfort, clear lines offered safety. The gate was closed, not with stone but with story. And yet, the body did not forget. Beneath the silence of culture, breath still remembers how to mingle. Consider the cold nights our ancestors endured, how survival depended on closeness, how warmth was not a possession, but a shared gift. In such moments, difference mattered less than presence. The gate stood open because it needed no guardian. Footprints in mud tell this story without words. Two sets, overlapping, one heavier, one lighter, both moving forward, together. Emotional symbolism flows here like water, slow, reflective, carrying weight without urgency. The gate becomes not a place of division, but of meeting, a reminder that identity itself was once fluid, shaped by contact rather than isolation. It is said that we carry this history in our breath, in the way lungs expand to cold air, in the way skin responds to light, in instincts that feel older than memory. These are not accidents. They are inheritances, yet cultural silence persists. Textbooks speak carefully, museums display skulls behind glass, charts draw lines where life once blurred. The gate is mentioned only in passing, if at all. A narrow corridor quickly closed. Why does this silence endure? Perhaps because to remember the gate is to question the story of separateness, to accept that identity is not a sealed chamber, but a threshold, always opening, always closing, shaped by those who pass through. Such uncertainty can feel unsettling. It asks us to release the comfort of fixed origins, to accept that we are not singular echoes but harmonies, layered, blended, unfinished. As the pace slows, the listener is invited to rest with this uncertainty. Imagine standing once more before the gate. There is no guard, no signpost, only the soft sound of wind moving through stone. You do not need to step through. You do not need to name it. Simply being near is enough. Perhaps the gate was never meant to be marked. Perhaps it remains open because closing it would require forgetting too much. As night deepens, as thoughts loosen their hold, the idea settles gently that who we are is not a destination, but a passage. That breath itself is an act of crossing, air moving from world to body, from outside to within. The final reflection does not seek resolution. The gate remains open, unmarked, patient. It waits without expectation, accepting that identity itself may be a threshold we were never meant to close. And so the story fades, not into darkness, but into quiet, where memory and breath meet, where the gate still stands, half seen in dream and dust, inviting nothing, refusing nothing, simply allowing. Perhaps it was never meant to be guarded. Perhaps it was always meant to be breathed. It is said that fire never truly dies. Even when the flames have folded themselves into darkness, even when the last ember has dimmed to a faint breathing red, fire remains, waiting, remembering, patient as stone. In forgotten corners of the earth, deep within caves where light rarely lingers, embers still glow long after the firekeepers have gone. Imagine such a cave now. The entrance is narrow, shaped by water and time. Outside, the night moves slowly beneath a star-marked sky. Inside, the air is cool and still, carrying the faint scent of ash. On the cave floor, a circle of blackened stone holds the remains of a hearth. No voices stir, no hands tend the flame. And yet, a warmth lingers, subtle but unmistakable, as if the fire itself refuses to forget who first taught it to live. This is where the story begins, not with a blaze, but with embers. Beneath the silence, whispers tell us that fire was once a mystery too sacred to own. Before it became a tool, before it answered commands, it was a presence, a teacher, a living thing that demanded patience and care. To sit with fire was to learn restraint. To feed it was to learn generosity. To keep it alive through the long night was to learn devotion. Some believe the first firekeepers were not us alone. Long before names hardened into histories, others walked these lands, beings shaped differently by time, by cold, by bone and breath. They learned the language of flame not through conquest, but through listening, watching how sparks leapt from stone, how lightning scarred trees, how heat transformed food, hardened tools, softened darkness. Fire revealed itself slowly, like trust. The narrative drifts gently here, honoring flame as a sacred teacher. It offered warmth against encroaching ice, protection against prowling shadows, transformation, raw into cooked, fragile into strong, night into gathering. Fire made space for story. It gathered bodies close and taught them to share, and knowledge, once born, did not remain still. Evidence emerges quietly, scattered like ash across time. Hearths appear in places far apart, yet strikingly similar. Ash layers renewed with care, stones arranged with intention, fire scars that speak of skill, not chance. The knowledge of flame moved hand to hand, passed across invisible boundaries. A spark carried from one shelter to another, a gesture shown, then mirrored, a vigilance learned by watching. These were not isolated discoveries, they were shared understandings. Beneath the silence of archaeology, a deeper truth breathes. Firekeeping was communal. It crossed lines we later pretended did not exist. Those who mastered flame did not hoard it. They taught it, and in teaching they shaped the future. The emotional journey here is one of quiet gratitude, tinged with loss. For as the fire spread, as its benefits became undeniable, something else began to fade. The hands that first learned its moods grew fewer. The faces that once sat closest to the flame began to blur. Their names, if they ever had names that could survive, were not carried forward. It is said that history remembers outcomes, not teachers. As generations passed, fire became assumed, expected. Its origins softened into myth. Stories credited heroes, gods, chance. The careful watchers, the first keepers, slipped into shadow. Their contributions absorbed, their presence unspoken, and so gratitude turned silent. Contradictions appear gently here, like cracks in cooling stone. Those labeled primitive show signs of advanced care, those dismissed as simple reveal ritual, burials arranged near hearths, tools placed with intention, ashes preserved, not discarded. These gestures speak of reverence, of understanding deeper than survival alone. Fire was not merely used, it was honored. Some believe the first firekeepers understood something we have forgotten, that flame is not owned, only tended, that it responds to attention, not dominance, that it remembers the hands that approach it with respect. Perhaps that is why fire still feels alive. Sit long enough before a flame, and it seems to watch back. Its movements are never rushed, its sounds are never harsh unless provoked. It consumes, yes, but it also gives. Light, heat, a center around which life gathers. In ancient shelters, fire marked time. It separated night from day, safety from exposure, life from cold silence. Around it, stories formed, not of triumph, but of continuity, of seasons, of animals, of ancestors whose ashes might one day join the hearth itself. And here, loss enters softly. For when the first firekeepers faded, whether through climate's slow cruelty, through absorption into others, or through quiet erasure, the flame remained, but its lineage thinned. The gift survived. The givers did not. It is difficult to mourn what was never named. The chapter holds this grief gently, like a vigil. No accusations rise, no blame is cast. Only a sense of imbalance, of something taken without remembrance, of teachers erased once their lessons were learned. Beneath the silence, fire continues to speak. In every culture, flame retains its sacred quality. Candles in dark rooms, eternal fires kept alive through generations. Hearths still treated as centers, even when their meaning has dimmed. These are echoes, unconscious tributes to the first keepers. Marked by the moon, firelight still gathers people close, still softens edges, still invites reflection. Perhaps this is how remembrance survives when stories do not. The atmosphere remains hushed as the narrative slows toward its close. The cave returns. The hearth rests quiet. Ashes lie cool, layered gently by time. No footsteps disturb them, no voices call out names long lost. Yet the fire remembers. It remembers the first hands that shielded it from wind, the first eyes that watched sparks leap and learned patience, the first nights made bearable by its glow. Memory lives not only in words but in practice. Every flame lit with care carries the past forward. And so the chapter ends not with extinguishing, but with settling. Ashes cooling into earth, heat dispersing into stone, the cave breathing softly, holding what remains without judgment. Perhaps the first firekeepers do not seek recognition. Perhaps it is enough that their gift endures. Some voices do not need to be spoken aloud. They echo in warmth, in shared light, in the simple act of keeping something alive. As sleep approaches, as your breath slows and thoughts soften, imagine those embers still glowing, deep in the earth, deep in memory, fire waiting, patient, remembering, and maybe in that quiet warmth gratitude stirs, not loud, not urgent, just present, because fire remembers, even when stories do not. It is said that rivers do not hurry. They move as if they have all the time in the world, because they do. They slide through valleys like a long breath released, dark and steady, carrying what the mountains give them, carrying what the earth forgets. And at night, when the world softens under a veil of moonlight, a river becomes something else entirely, a corridor. Imagine it now, a river at night, black as ink, its surface lifting and falling in slow, patient folds. The moon lays a pale path across it, star-marked, trembling, never still. Along the banks, reeds whisper, stones gleam and vanish. Somewhere far off an owl calls once, then returns to silence. And beneath the river's surface, the current bears unseen traces. Fragments so small they cannot be held in the hand, yet so enduring they can shape a life. This is where the chapter begins, with the thought that something has always been traveling. Not only water, not only silt, but blood, quiet, unannounced, moving from one human story into another, weaving through time like an oceanic thread. A lineage slipping through the world without banners or names, leaving behind no monuments, only the faintest echo inside the body. Whispers tell us that migration was never just a line on a map. In forgotten corners of the earth, people walked under the same sky for thousands of nights. They followed the pull of seasons and the promise of grassland. They read the language of clouds and the tilt of the sun. They crossed deserts when the winds allowed it, and waited at river mouths when the waters were too wild. They carried children on their backs and fire in careful bundles. They carried grief and hope. They carried songs, soft and unfinished, like smoke in the lungs. And when they moved, they did not move alone. Some believe that long ago the world held more than one kind of person, not merely strangers from distant valleys, not merely different tribes with different words, but others, kin with unfamiliar faces, Neanderthal, Denisovan, others still unnamed, their history folded into the earth like a sealed scroll. They lived in parallel, sometimes apart, sometimes close enough for their shadows to touch at the edge of firelight. And when paths crossed, when hunger and winter and wonder pressed people toward one another, something deeper than trade occurred. Breath mingled, hands met, warmth was shared, and blood, silent as water under ice, traveled forward. The narrative drifts across continents now, not in sharp leaps but in gentle currents. We follow starlit paths that do not belong to any one nation or era, but to the human instinct to move. The land changes, the sky remains, the stars watch without judgment. There is a shoreline, once wide and walkable, where sea levels were lower and the world was stitched together differently. There is a corridor of grassland stretching beneath cold winds. There are mountain passes where footprints pressed into snow and vanished by morning. There are caves where fire was coaxed into life, where ash settled like soft grey snow, where painted hands reached toward stone as if touching the future. Somewhere in these places, meetings happened, not always peaceful, not always easy. Yet even in tension, proximity can leave traces. A shared shelter during a storm, a night of uneasy truce, a season of living near the same water source, watching the same animals pass. And in quieter moments, moments not recorded, not carved, not sung loud enough to survive, there were unions. Children born carrying more than one lineage, children whose bones would one day be dust, but whose blood would continue. It is said that blood remembers what names cannot. That is the tenderness of this chapter. The listener is invited to feel inherited memory without language, not memory as a story, but memory as a sensation, a familiarity that has no face, a pull toward places you have never seen, an instinctive comfort in cold air, or a particular shape of sleep, or an uncanny resilience that feels older than your own life. Beneath the silence, ancestry breathes. Modern histories often draw ancestry as a tree, clean trunk, branching limbs, neat separations. But the river does not move that way. The river does not branch to prove a point. It spreads, merges, disappears underground, returns again, reshaping itself around stone. Blood is more like that. A tide, a current, a waterway that receives and releases, carrying traces forward without asking permission. Historical contradictions surface softly here, like submerged stones felt beneath the foot. There are maps, old and new, that tell tidy stories. Here is where they lived. Here is where they ended. Here is where we began. Yet bones and blood quietly confirm something messier, something more human. The evidence is not loud. It does not demand attention. It simply persists. Genetic traces, small, spiral-coded whispers, appear in modern people far from where we once believed those ancient relatives belonged. A fragment here, a strand there, a hidden note in the body's long song. It suggests meetings we did not record, crossings we did not admit, intimacy we did not preserve in story. Why do maps deny what blood confirms? Some believe the silence is cultural. We crave clean origins, a single beginning, a pure line. It comforts the waking mind to imagine identity as something sealed, stable, unquestionable. But the ancient world was wide and porous. Boundaries were not lines, they were zones of mingling. The need for purity myths may have come later, when societies became larger, when belonging became guarded, when fear needed shapes to point at in the dark. Perhaps it was easier to call the others monsters than to call them kin. Perhaps it was easier to say they vanished than to say they remain. And yet, the river keeps flowing. Symbolism drifts through this chapter like moonlight on water, veins like rivers, rivers like veins. The body itself becomes a landscape, blood becomes a traveler, each heartbeat a small oar dipping into time, moving the vessel forward. Imagine an ancient camp at the edge of a river. The water is low, exposing smooth stones. Fire burns in a shallow pit. Smoke lifts toward stars. Two groups watch each other across the glow, similar, different, curious, cautious. Their languages do not fully match, but silence can be shared. Someone offers food, someone accepts. A child laughs, another child stares, wide-eyed, trying to make sense of unfamiliar faces. Night thickens. The river moves beside them, constant, indifferent, sacred. And in the darkness, when fear softens and the world narrows to breath and warmth, the gate between lineages opens without ceremony. No priest, no witness, only the slow turning of the earth and the soft insistence of being alive. A union occurs, not as conquest, not as legend, as life. And then, like a river slipping past a bend, the moment is gone. People move on, tribes drift, seasons change, the camp disappears beneath grass, the hearth cools, ash becomes soil, but something remains, small, unseen, yet stubborn as stone. A trace, a strand, a quiet inheritance travelling forward. This is the melancholy too, the realization that so much of our true history travelled in silence because no one thought to write it down, or because writing had not yet been born, or because later generations preferred other stories. Where memory fades, blood keeps going. The chapter deepens into that gentle ache. We cannot point to the exact faces. We cannot always name the meetings. We cannot reconstruct the full weave of crossings. We can only feel their presence in the contradictions. Care in the archaeological record, where we expected brutality, complexity, where we expected simplicity, intimacy, where we were told there was only separation. Sometimes the past is not a clear portrait. It is a shimmer, a reflection broken by moving water. If you lean close enough, you may glimpse yourself in it. Not your own face, but a face behind it. An ancestor not fully human by modern definitions, yet undeniably part of you. A traveller whose footsteps overlapped with others in mud now hardened to stone. A voice that did not survive in song, but survived in the shape of a lung, the curve of a bone, the endurance of a cell. It is said that some inheritances arrive without being asked for. They arrive like moonlight on a river, quiet, inevitable, belonging to no one and everyone at once. And now the chapter begins its slow closing, like a candle leaning toward darkness. We return to the river at night. The current continues, carrying leaf fragments and starlight and unseen histories. It passes beneath a stand of trees where the wind makes a soft, oceanic sound. It passes stones that have watched for ages. It passes a place where someone once stepped in, washing dust from their hands, leaving a ripple that lasted only moments. The river does not explain itself. It does not name what it carries. It simply moves. Perhaps ancestry was never meant to be drawn as a tree, fixed and certain. Perhaps it is meant to be felt as water, merging, separating, returning, changing shape while remaining itself. A tide that holds many oceans within it. A current that carries forgotten lineages forward without asking the world to remember. The moon shifts. The silver path on the water breaks, reforms, breaks again. The river disappears into the dark bend of night, taking its secrets with it. And as sleep approaches, soft and unhurried, you may sense what the river has been saying all along, that you are not a single story, that you are a movement, that beneath the silence something ancient still travels, quietly, faithfully, through you. Perhaps it was never meant to be found in words. Perhaps it was only meant to be carried. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. It is said that the smallest graves hold the largest questions, not because they are loud or dramatic or carved with names that survive the centuries, but because they are quiet, because they ask their questions in the language of folded hands, of careful placement, of earth pressed softly back into place. Imagine it now. A shallow hollow in ancient ground, marked by the moon's pale attention. The air is cold and still. There are no walls, no roof, only night, and the soft hush of a world that does not yet belong to anyone. A small body lies within the grave, not abandoned, not scattered, but arranged with intention. The hands are folded close, as if in sleep. The knees drawn in slightly, as if the child is returning to the curled posture of the womb. Dust gathers gently in the folds of skin and hair, like a veil. And here is the mystery. The child's species is uncertain. The bones are small, fragile as whispered prayers. Some features seem familiar, soft curves that speak of our own lineage. Other features carry a different signature, an older shape, a heavier brow beginning to form, a subtle difference in the way the skull holds its silence. A child who belongs, and yet does not fully belong. In forgotten corners of the earth, archaeologists have found such burials, rare, intimate, almost unbearable in their tenderness. A child laid down with care in a place shared by more than one kind of human. A grave where boundaries dissolved, where the strict lines we draw in waking life, us and them, human and other, simply did not matter enough to stop grief. Whispers tell us that grief is the oldest language. Before laws, before empires, before the sharpness of borders, there was the simple truth that loss hurts. That a small body gone still can turn the world into silence. That death, when it arrives in the form of a child, feels like a tear in the fabric of creation. So the living did what the living have always done. They made a ritual. Not necessarily with words, not necessarily with song. Sometimes ritual is only patience. Sometimes it is only the refusal to leave someone behind. A careful lifting, a gentle washing, a smoothing of the earth, a stone placed here, a tool laid there, a sprinkle of red ochre like sunset ground into dust, offered as if color could bring warmth back to a cold body. The chapter's emotional arc is intimate and aching, like standing near a candle that burns low. There is no rush here. Everything unfolds slowly, with long pauses like held breath, because this is not a story of conquest or triumph. It is a story of tenderness surviving where we least expect it. Some believe the child was born of two lineages, a bridge made flesh. A quiet proof that ancient humans did not live in separate worlds, as neatly as modern minds would like to imagine. That there were nights when different kinds of people shared the same shelter, the same fire, the same fear of winter, that they exchanged more than tools, that they exchanged breath, and in those exchanges children were born, carrying blended inheritance like a hidden scroll. But whether the child was a bridge or simply a guest of circumstance, the burial itself remains the sacred center of the mystery. Because someone grieved, someone who may not have looked exactly like the child, someone whose own species might be uncertain too. Neanderthal hands, perhaps broader and strong, careful enough to fold these smaller hands into rest. Or human hands, softer in bone, learning reverence from a neighbor whose name would never survive. Either way, the grave says the same thing. You mattered. In the deepening exploration, we drift into the world that surrounded this burial, a world of caves and wind-scoured plains where the sky was star-marked and vast, where the night pressed close and the fire was sacred. Life was not easy. Hunger came often, cold came faithfully, and still, there was room for compassion. This is where contradiction enters like a quiet ripple across dark water. We are often told to expect brutality in the ancient world. We imagine claw and tooth, constant violence, fear shaping every interaction. Yet graves like this offer another truth, one that arrives softly, almost shyly. Love existed there too. Not romantic love, not the polished love of poems, but the raw, protective love that appears when something precious is lost. The love that makes people slow down even when survival demands speed. The love that makes them spend energy on ritual when energy is scarce. A shared grave is not practical, it is sacred. It is a choice that says, I will carry grief even if it costs me. Some believe this is what made early humans truly human, not the tool, not the hunt, not the cleverness, but the willingness to care for the vulnerable, to honor the dead, to recognize kinship even across difference. And perhaps, in that distant time, difference did not feel like a threat. Perhaps it felt like a variation of the same song. Imagine the small community gathered in the moonlight, faces half lit by flame, the child's body wrapped in hide or woven grass. Someone hums, not a melody we would recognize, but a simple tone, steady and low, like wind through reeds. Another places a small object near the child, maybe a stone worn smooth by water, maybe a tool shaped by careful hands, not for use but for meaning, a token, a whisper made physical, and then the earth returns to the hollow, not thrown, not dumped, placed, layer by layer. A burial is a kind of promise. We will not forget you entirely. But time is complicated. Where memory fades, even promises soften. The child remains beneath the soil. Seasons pass, footsteps come and go, fires burn and die. The living move on, following animals, following warmth, following water. And eventually, even the memory of this grave dissolves from spoken thought. Yet the burial remains. The earth holds it like a secret. And thousands of years later, the grave is opened, not by mourners, but by hands wearing gloves, by brushes moving slowly through dust. The child's bones reappear into light. The folded hands still speak their quiet message. This is where the chapter's grief deepens, because the child returns into a world that may not know how to hold such tenderness. Modern minds rush to categorize which species, which group, which side of the story does this belong to? We ask for definitions, for certainty, for labels that make the mystery manageable. But the grave resists. It asks a different question. Does it matter when grief is shared? The narrative explores what it means to mourn across difference, to recognize kinship without definition, to look at another being and say, without language, your loss is my loss too. Perhaps this is the unity we later refused to remember. As civilizations rose, as identities hardened, as stories became weapons, we learned to divide. We learned to make categories into walls. We learned to tell ourselves we were alone, singular, pure, but the shared grave suggests otherwise. It suggests a time when boundaries were thinner, when the gate between lineages was open, when the heart did not require proof to care. Some believe the child is a symbol not of tragedy, but of connection, a quiet reminder that history is not only made of wars and kings and monuments, it is made of small gestures performed in silence, a hand folding another hand, a community pausing to honor a small life, a refusal to let death be meaningless. The pacing slows further now, respectful as a candle's last hour. We linger near the grave, not to solve it, but to sit beside it, to let its mystery settle into us like soft dust. The child rests. The soil above is cool. The world outside changes. Empires come and go. Languages rise and crumble. Maps redraw themselves again and again. Yet the child remains, untouched by our arguments. A sacred stillness surrounds this small body. And in that stillness, a question returns, quiet, persistent, like the sound of distant water. What if kinship is older than our divisions? What if the most ancient inheritance is not purity, but mingling? The chapter does not answer. It does not need to. Instead, it offers the final reflection as a gentle fade into silence. Perhaps the child was never meant to be claimed by any one lineage. Perhaps the child belongs to the earth itself, a small ember of unity, buried and kept safe until we were ready to see it without fear. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. As sleep approaches, let the image soften, the folded hands, the moonlit soil, the hush of a world holding its breath. Let the child rest, not as a puzzle to be solved, but as a sacred symbol of love where hostility was expected, of tenderness where we assumed only survival. And if you listen closely, beneath the silence, you may hear it. Not a name, not a verdict, just a quiet, ancient truth, like a lullaby without words, that once, long ago, we grieved together. It is said that some places listen longer than people do. They do not speak quickly. They do not interrupt. They wait, through seasons, through silence, through the long erosion of certainty. And when they finally answer, they do so not with words, but with echoes. Imagine such a place now. A cave mouth opens beneath a star-marked sky, its entrance shaped like a slow breath drawn from stone. The night outside is cool and vast, scented with pine and damp earth. Inside, darkness gathers gently, not as threat, but as invitation. A torch or small flame enters first, its light trembling across walls that curve inward like the inside of a lung. This is a resonant chamber. Each step sends a soft reply back to you, footfall returning as whisper, breath returning as murmur. The walls are not smooth, they ripple and swell, veined with mineral traces that catch the light like frozen water, and as the flame steadies, shapes begin to emerge. Hands, animals, spirals, marks layered upon marks. This cave has been spoken to more than once. Whispers tell us that caves were never empty spaces, they were thresholds, between light and dark, between surface and depth, between the living world and something older, quieter, more patient. To enter a cave was to enter a body larger than your own, a stone body that remembered. And this one remembers two songs. In forgotten corners of the earth, archaeologists and listeners of silence have found such chambers, places where art and sound overlap in ways that defy clean timelines. Paintings made in styles thought to belong to different peoples, flutes shaped from bone, tuned to scales that should not align. symbols that repeat with variation, as if passed from hand to hand, voice to voice. The mystery is not that these things exist. The mystery is that they exist together. The tone of this chapter is reverent, almost liturgical, because the cave itself feels like a sanctuary, not owned by one lineage, not claimed by a single story, but shared, layered with intention, revisited, renewed. Some believe the first song began here long before the second arrived. A low hum, perhaps, a rhythm struck against stone, a breath blown across hollow bone. Sound offered to the dark, not for performance, but for presence. To make the cave aware of those who entered, to announce softly, "We are here, and we mean no harm." Firelight flickered, shadows danced, the walls listened. Hands pressed pigment into stone, red ochre mixed with fat, charcoal ground fine as dust. Animals emerged, bison heavy with power, horses mid-stride, creatures half-remembered from dreams. The paintings were not decorations, they were gestures, invitations, ways of speaking to something unseen. And then, much later, or perhaps not so much later, another song entered. Different hands, slightly different proportions, a different way of shaping line and curve, new marks layered gently over old ones, not erasing them, but responding. Bone flutes appear in the sediment, their finger holes placed with care, tuned to intervals that echo strangely well within the chamber. Two traditions, overlapping, two voices, sharing space. The deepening mystery lies here. These styles should not coexist, at least not according to the neat stories we like to tell. We assign art to timelines. We assign sound to species. We say this belongs here, that belongs there. Yet the cave does not agree. It holds everything. Emotional symbolism flows through sound and shadow. When one flute is played, the cave answers. When another is imagined, the same resonance returns. The chamber does not discriminate. It amplifies all offerings equally, blending them into a single breathing hum. Perhaps this is what collaboration looked like before the word existed. Not negotiation, not dominance, but listening. Some believe that different lineages, human and not quite human, familiar and strange, used the same sacred spaces. They may not have spoken the same language, they may not have shared the same myths, but they shared reverence, and reverence does not require sameness. Imagine a gathering deep within the cave. The fire is small, carefully fed so smoke does not choke the air. The walls glow faintly, animals seeming to move as shadows flicker. Someone raises a flute to their lips. A note sounds, low, wavering, uncertain at first. It spirals outward, meets stone, returns altered but intact. Another listens. Then another voice joins, not with the same instrument, not with the same melody, but with harmony. A chant, perhaps, a percussive tap, a breathy hum shaped by a different throat. The sounds do not compete. They overlap. The cave holds them both, weaving them together into something neither could produce alone. A third sound emerges, the voice of the space itself. It is said that caves were the first cathedrals, not because they demanded worship, but because they inspired it. They dwarfed the individual. They reminded those who entered that they were part of something larger, older, shared. The art on the walls supports this idea. There is no single author, no signature, no claim of ownership. Marks are added, revisited, traced over, sometimes centuries apart. Yet the intention feels continuous, as if each artist recognized the presence of those who came before. Respect without possession. This is where the story gently resists the familiar narrative of conquest. We often imagine the ancient world as a place of constant struggle, where one group replaced another through force. But the cave suggests another possibility, one quieter, more complex. What if some encounters were cooperative? What if knowledge moved through imitation rather than domination? What if sound and symbol were shared, not because they were taken, but because they were offered? The cave does not answer directly. It hums. Beneath the silence, the chamber carries memory the way stone carries water, slowly, invisibly, shaping itself around what passes through. Even when no one enters, the echoes remain suspended in the rock, like breath held between ribs. Centuries pass. The fire goes out, the flutes are set aside, the people leave, following animals, seasons, other callings. Dust begins its patient work. Calcium drips from the ceiling, forming thin veils over painted hands and spirals. The songs fade from air, but not from place, and then, much later, someone enters again. A footstep breaks the silence. A light returns. The cave stirs. The walls reveal their layered stories slowly, reluctantly, as if deciding whether this new presence is worthy of listening. And when the observer finally understands what they are seeing, not one tradition, but many, the realization arrives softly. This place remembers more than we do. The emotional arc turns here, toward awe tinged with humility. The cave has outlasted arguments about who came first, who belonged where, who deserves credit. It has kept what it was given without judgment. Perhaps this is why the cave feels alive, because it was never used as a weapon of memory. It was a vessel. Scrolls crumble, languages fracture, stories harden into myths and laws. But the cave endures, holding its blended songs beneath layers of dust. In the final reflection, the narrative quiets further. We stop asking the cave to explain itself. We simply listen. If you stand still long enough, the silence changes. It thickens. It becomes textured, almost musical, not in pitch, but in presence. The sense that something once moved here and has not entirely left. The cave does not favor one song over the other. It hums with both. Perhaps this is the lesson it offers, not loudly, not insistently, but patiently. That creation is not always born from victory. That beauty does not require erasure. That the oldest rituals were shared, not owned. Perhaps collaboration is older than conflict. As sleep approaches, let the image soften, the chamber dim, the flame low, the painted walls breathing quietly in the dark. Imagine the two songs rising once more, not distinct, not merged beyond recognition, but intertwined, each retaining its shape while contributing to something larger. The cave listens. It always has. Some voices do not vanish when their singers leave. They settle into stone. They wait beneath dust and time. They hum softly, endlessly, until someone is quiet enough to hear them again. Perhaps it was never meant to be a single song. Perhaps harmony was the beginning, and beneath the silence, the cave remembers. It is said that the oldest inheritance is not carried in words, not in names etched on stone, not in scrolls sealed with wax, not in songs that survive on the lips of children. The oldest inheritance enters you quietly, the way night air enters an open window. A slow inhale. Imagine it now, this moment, where you sit or lie beneath the hush of evening. The world has softened, the edges of thought loosen, and your breath becomes the only sound you truly need to listen to. In and out. A tide moving through the ribcage, a gentle rhythm older than your memories. Whispers tell us that breath is a doorway, not only into the body but into time, because every inhale is not only yours, it is shaped by countless lungs before you, by ribs that rose and fell beneath glaciers and desert moons, by throats that learned to warm cold air, by skin that learned to hold heat, by blood that learned to carry oxygen through long migrations. In forgotten corners of the earth, before history became a single story, many kinds of people shared the night. Some were shaped like us, some were shaped differently. And when their paths crossed, when shelter was shared, when warmth was exchanged, when life insisted on mixing, something subtle was carried forward. Not a monument, not a declaration, a physiological gift, a quiet advantage, a lineage written in breath. The chapter begins here, as if in a sacred ritual, noticing the inhale not as habit, but as heritage. The air slides past the lips, past the tongue, into the throat. It reaches the lungs, soft chambers of folded tissue, delicate as veils, yet strong enough to sustain a lifetime. They expand like wings made of flesh. They fill, they hold, they release. Some believe that within these motions live whispers of forgotten kin, those whose names were never spoken into our family trees, those who shared caves and riverbanks with our ancestors, those who walked under the same star-marked sky, then faded from the surface of history while remaining quietly inside us. It is said that the body is a library without ink, and when you breathe, you turn its pages. The narrative drifts gently into deep time, where air was colder and nights were longer. Imagine the edge of an ice age, wind sweeping across open plains, sharp with frost. A small group moves through the darkness, wrapped in hides, carrying embers in a bundle of bark. Their breath rises in white clouds. Each inhale burns. Each exhale is visible proof of being alive. In such a world, survival is not only strength, it is adaptation, and adaptation can be inherited. Some believe that certain traits, subtle, quiet, yet powerful, came from lineages we once stood beside. A chest shaped slightly differently, able to draw more air. A nose that warms and filters cold wind before it reaches the lungs. Skin that holds heat. Blood that carries oxygen with steady efficiency. Even the way the immune system recognizes the unseen. None of this feels mystical in the daylight, and yet at night, when you listen to your own breathing, it can feel like a sacred secret, like a message passed forward through silence. Because it is strange, isn't it? We are taught to imagine ourselves as separate, a clean branch on the tree of life, a distinct beginning, a pure line. Yet the body whispers otherwise. Contradictions appear softly, like footprints emerging under thin snow. Textbooks and diagrams may draw sharp boundaries. This species ended here, that one began there. They may speak as though the past was tidy, but bodies quietly remember what stories deny. A trace of ancient cold tolerance, a whisper of a lung built for harsh air, a resilience that does not match the neatness of our myths. Beneath the silence, the body carries proof of contact. Not loud proof, not something easily pointed at in a mirror, but something that shows itself when the world turns cold, when disease tries to enter, when altitude thins the air, when hunger stretches long. These are moments when inheritance speaks. Not through words, through breath. Some believe the most intimate history is written in physiology, because physiology cannot lie the way stories can. Stories can erase, stories can reshape, stories can claim purity and separation, but the body must remain honest. It must respond to wind, to cold, to sickness, to hunger. It must carry what worked, and so the gift stayed, even when names vanished, even when faces became shadows, even when we stopped telling the full story. The chapter's tone remains soft, bodily, sacred. We speak of lungs as chambers of memory, of skin as a living veil, of breath as a tide carrying echoes. Imagine a cave again, deep, quiet, smelling of stone and smoke. Inside, a fire burns low. Two figures sit near it. Their silhouettes are similar, yet not identical. One has a broader brow, a different curve of jaw. The other has eyes that catch the firelight in a familiar way. They share warmth, share the same air. Their breaths mingle in the cold. And then, time folds. The world keeps moving. Lineages shift. Some disappear from the surface, yet the mingled breath becomes mingled blood. The gift passes forward, hidden in the spiral code of life, not celebrated, not mourned, simply carried. Whispers tell us that this is how most history truly travels, quietly. We tend to honor the visible, crowns, battles, cities carved in stone. But the oldest triumphs are invisible, the ability to endure winter, the ability to digest new foods, the ability to resist certain illnesses, the ability to breathe efficiently in harsh landscapes. These are gifts given by ancestors whose names we do not know. How do we thank them? How do we mourn them? The emotional journey of this chapter moves gently toward acceptance, a slow, warm realization that inheritance does not require permission, that kinship can exist without clear labels, that you can carry someone's gift without carrying their name. This acceptance is not loud. It is like settling into a blanket. It is like realizing you do not have to solve the mystery to honor it. Perhaps the forgotten kin do not ask to be recognized in museums or textbooks. Perhaps they ask only to be felt, in the rise and fall of the chest, in the steady pulse of oxygen through blood, in the simple miracle that you can lie here in the dark and continue. Breathe in. The air tastes faintly of night. It passes into you as if you have done this forever. Because you have, in a way. Because the act is older than language, older than identity as we define it, older than division. Breath is the one ritual every lineage shares. Some believe that when we breathe, we join an ancient chorus, not with voices, but with rhythm. A slow inhale, the world entering you. A slow exhale, you returning to the world. And with each cycle, the need for certainty loosens, because certainty is a daytime hunger. At night, the body prefers truth without sharp edges. The truth that you are not singular, the truth that you are layered, the truth that your breath is a meeting place where memory fades, breath remains. And so the chapter begins to close like the dimming of a flame. The language grows quieter, the images soften. We stop reaching for names and dates. We stop demanding clean borders around ancestry. Instead, we listen to the hush in the lungs, to the slight pause at the top of an inhale, to the warmth of an exhale leaving the mouth like a spirit. Perhaps it was never meant to be fully understood. Perhaps the body was never meant to carry a simple story. Perhaps the past is not a straight line, but a tide of breath passing through countless forms, countless winters, countless nights beneath the same celestial ceiling. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and tonight the echo is inside you. The final moment arrives with a slow exhale, not as an ending, but as a release. A letting go of the need to define every ancestor, a surrender to the sacred uncertainty that you are made of many quiet gifts. Breath leaves you gently, like mist dissolving into moonlight. And in that softness the lineage remains, written not in ink, not in stone, but in the simple, ancient ritual of breathing. It is said that twilight is a threshold, not day, not night, only the soft place between, where familiar shapes blur and the world becomes quieter, as if it is listening to itself. In that dim, veiled hour, a question can hang in the air like incense, unmoving and impossible to ignore. When did kin become other? Imagine a path at dusk, marked by the moon's early glow. The trees stand still. The sky is oceanic, deepening from pale to indigo, like ink spreading through water. In the distance, smoke rises from a fire, thin as breath. Somewhere close you can hear footsteps, but you cannot see who makes them. A figure appears at the edge of sight. At first, you think it is someone you know. Then the light shifts, the outline seems unfamiliar, and in that small uncertainty, so gentle, so ordinary, something ancient stirs, a memory older than words, a hesitation written not in thought, but in the body's quiet instincts. Whispers tell us that this is how division begins, not with war, not with banners, but with a pause in recognition. In forgotten corners of the earth, long before nations, long before maps learned to draw hard lines, humans lived in a world that held more than one kind of human. Some faces were shaped like ours, some were shaped differently, some voices carried different tones, some bodies moved with a slightly different rhythm beneath the same star-marked sky. And for a long while, perhaps longer than we admit, these differences did not always mean distance. There were crossings, shared shelters, shared fires, shared nights when cold pressed close and warmth mattered more than identity. Yet somewhere along the winding river of time, a shift occurred. The circle tightened, the story narrowed, the familiar was renamed, the neighbor was recast as shadow. And so we arrive at the heart of this chapter, myth-making, the stories that turned kin into strangers, the stories that took a face once seen by firelight and placed it behind a veil. Some believe myth began as a lantern, an attempt to light what could not be fully understood. The ancient world was vast and uncertain. Storms arrived without warning. Animals hunted in the dark. Illness came like a hidden hand. People needed meaning the way they needed warmth. So they built stories, and stories, like fire, can comfort or consume. At first, perhaps, the myths were gentle. Explanations for strange footprints in snow, for distant calls in the forest, for figures glimpsed at the edge of the campfire's glow. A different kind of person passing through the trees might have seemed like a spirit, a mountain-born being, a creature from the veil between worlds. But then fear entered the story, and fear reshapes everything it touches. It is said that fear has its own artistry. It paints sharper edges. It darkens the unknown. It turns nuance into threat. It takes a neighbor and makes them a warning. Slowly, the myths changed. The other became a monster. The different became cursed. The stranger became a lesson children were told at night. Do not wander, do not follow, do not trust the shadows. Emotional symbolism moves through this chapter like soft smoke, masks, veils, mirrors. Picture a mask carved from wood or bone, painted with soot and ochre. It does not represent an animal. It does not represent a god. It represents the idea of not us. It is worn in ritual, passed from hand to hand, until the face beneath becomes irrelevant. The mask becomes the story, and stories, repeated long enough, harden like stone. Some believe this is how lineage was narrowed to feel safe, because a wide lineage is unsettling. It suggests mingling, blending, thresholds that cannot be guarded. It suggests that identity is not a sealed chamber, but a moving tide. For communities trying to survive scarcity, cold winters, limited food, crowded shelters, certainty can feel like protection. The idea of purity becomes a kind of shelter wall. So the story is tightened, a line is drawn, a single origin is claimed, and those who do not fit are placed outside the circle, even if they once sat at the fire. Beneath the silence, we can still sense the ache of that separation. Not the sharp ache of sudden loss, but the slow ache of something erased carefully, intentionally, as if forgetting were an act of survival. Whispers tell us that we forgot not because we could not remember, but because remembering threatened the stories we needed to believe. Historical contradiction surfaces here, softly but insistently. The body remembers what myth denies. In our blood, traces remain of lineages once labeled as other. In our bones, subtle shapes persist. In our breath, an inheritance lingers, quiet proof of closeness. And yet the cultural memory is thin. We carry the ancestor, but we do not speak their name. We wear the mask, but we forget who carved it. Imagine a mirror in an ancient dwelling, though not glass, not polished metal, only water held in a bowl, trembling in firelight. A person leans over it at night, searching for themselves. Their reflection wavers. Their face is familiar, but in certain angles, in certain shadows, something else seems to appear. A brow slightly heavier, a jaw slightly broader, a look that feels older than the present. The mirror does not accuse. It simply shows, and the mind, uneasy, turns away, because recognition can be unsettling. To recognize the stranger as kin is to soften the boundary. To soften the boundary is to risk uncertainty. And yet, the chapter asks us to move slowly toward that recognition, not with force, but with tenderness. like a storyteller guiding you deeper into dream space, where fear loses its sharpness, where the heart can hold complexity without needing to conquer it. It is said that in sleep, the mind releases its guards, the veils thin. The stories we tell ourselves become quieter, and in that quiet, older truths can rise like mist. Consider how often myths of monsters resemble human shapes. Hairy beings at the forest edge, giants in the mountains, cave dwellers with strange faces, shadow people who vanish before dawn. What if these were not pure inventions? What if they were echoes, distorted memories of real encounters with other kinds of people, turned into cautionary tales as generations passed? What if monster was simply the name fear gave to a neighbor it could no longer understand? The tone remains mournful but calm, because this is not an accusation against the past. It is a gentle lament for what was lost when stories became walls. The lament is for the ancestor who became a warning instead of a remembrance, for the face that was once a presence, then became a shadow. We drift now into the most intimate part of the ritual, the removal of the mask. Not sudden, not dramatic, only slow, as if hands are lifting it away with reverence, afraid of tearing what lies beneath. First, the mask loosens at the edges. The carved features, sharp teeth, exaggerated brow, hollow eyes, begin to seem less convincing in the dim light. The paint flakes, the soot smudges. The story it carried grows tired, as all stories do when held too tightly. Behind it, another veil waits, a thinner one, made of assumption. The assumption that difference must mean danger, that kinship must be singular, that identity must be clean. This veil, too, begins to lift, and beneath it, a face, not monstrous, not otherworldly, only familiar, softened by time. A face that could have sat beside our ancestors at the fire. A face that could have laughed, could have grieved, could have watched the same stars with the same quiet wonder. A face that might still live in the subtle architecture of our own bodies. The reveal is not a shock, it is a sigh. The kind of sigh that comes when you realize you have been bracing against something that was never truly an enemy. It is said that some truths arrive like that, quietly, with relief rather than drama. The chapter's closing does not offer a clear conclusion, because history rarely does. We cannot fully trace the exact moment kin became other. We cannot pinpoint the first story that turned neighbor into shadow. We can only sense the gradual drift, the tightening of circles, the sharpening of myths, the comfort found in separation. But perhaps we can choose a different ending, not rewriting the past, but softening the present. Beneath the silence, let the thought settle gently, that the ancestor we named a stranger may never have wanted to be named at all. Perhaps they wanted only to remain, quietly, within us, waiting for a time when fear would loosen its grip. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and tonight, in the twilight of waking and sleep, you might be ready. So let the mask fall away completely, let it rest on the ground like an old shell, and look, softly, without urgency, into the face that remains. Familiar, unthreatening, a reminder that the line between us and other was never as solid as we claimed. Perhaps it was never meant to be. Perhaps the truest lineage was always wider than our stories. And as the world darkens, as breath slows, as sleep draws near, let the final image remain gentle, a face in moonlight, not strange, not distant, only quietly known. Where memory fades, recognition can return, not as certainty, as peace. It is said that before the first word was spoken, there was silence. Not the empty silence of abandonment, but a living quiet, wide, breathing, attentive. A silence that knew how to hold many presences at once. A silence that did not erase, but carried. Imagine the world now in near darkness. There is no fire close by, no walls to define the space, only starlight scattered and patient, resting on the curve of the earth like a blessing that asks for nothing in return. The ground beneath you feels ancient, cool, steady. The air moves slowly, as if careful not to disturb what gathers here, and something is gathering. Not in bodies you can clearly see, not in names you could recite, but in presence. A sense that you are not alone, even though no one speaks. A sense of many footsteps moving together, soundless, aligned not by command but by memory. This is the final procession, not a march, not a triumph, a walking in silence. Whispers tell us that all ancestors walk eventually, not forward into glory, not backward into dust, but beside us. They walk in the spaces between breaths, in the pauses between thoughts, in the quiet moments when the world loosens its grip and allows something older to surface. This chapter opens where all the others have been leading. The bone beneath the hearth, the face without a name, the gate of interbreathing, the ashes of the first firekeepers, the blood that travelled in silence, the child in the shared grave, the cave that remembered two songs, the lineage written in breath, the ancestor we named a stranger. Each was a fragment, each a whisper. Now they gather. Picture them not as separate figures, but as a slow, moving constellation. Some tall, some small, some shaped like us, some subtly different, some wearing no form at all, only presence, only weight. They move together across a dark plain beneath a star-marked sky, their steps uncounted, their direction unknown. No one leads, no one follows. They walk because walking is what the living do, and what the remembered continue to do when memory no longer needs words. The tone here is hushed, almost ceremonial, because this is not a place for answers. This is a place for holding, for allowing uncertainty to rest without being solved. Some believe history moves forward because of great events, wars, inventions, declarations carved into stone. But beneath those loud surfaces, another force has always been at work. Silence. The silence of unnamed teachers, the silence of shared grief, the silence of erased lineages, the silence of gifts passed without credit. This silence did not stop us, it carried us. Beneath the silence, bodies learned. They adapted. They remembered what mattered and let go of what did not. Fire was kept alive. Breath learned to endure cold. Blood learned to mingle. Hands learned to care for children not exactly like themselves. Voices learned to sing together, even when words differed. And when stories failed, when myths narrowed, when fear hardened into law, silence stepped in to do what language could not. It preserved, it held, it waited. The emotional arc of this final chapter does not rise, it settles, like dust after a long journey, like ash returning to soil, like breath slowing as sleep approaches. We have spent so long trying to recover names, trying to trace lines, trying to identify which ancestor belonged where, but perhaps reverent uncertainty is the truest ending. Perhaps the past was never meant to be neatly understood. Perhaps it was meant to be felt. Imagine now that the procession draws closer, not toward you, but through you. The figures do not stop. They do not ask permission. They move as water moves, as air moves, as time itself moves, passing through every open space. You may feel nothing dramatic, no chill, no vision, only a soft deepening, like a weight settling into place. Because erasure does not equal absence. To be unnamed is not to be gone. To be forgotten by story is not to be forgotten by life. The ancestors who were erased did not vanish into nothing. They became structure. They became function. They became instinct. They became resilience. They became the quiet reasons you are able to be here now, breathing, resting, alive. They became silence, and silence, when listened to closely, is never empty. It is layered, oceanic, full of echoes. Think of the way the sea carries the memory of rivers long dissolved. Think of the way stone remembers pressure long after the mountain has worn away. Think of the way your body remembers how to breathe without being told. These are not accidents. These are inheritances that survived without applause. The chapter invites you now to rest inside this idea, not to analyze it, not to grasp it, but to lie gently within it, like lying on the earth and trusting it to hold you. The ancestors walk. Some carry firelight in their chests, some carry water in their veins, some carry songs that never learned words, some carry grief that softened into wisdom. They walk together, and they walk within you, not as ghosts, not as burdens, but as completion. There is no final revelation, no hidden truth uncovered at the last moment, only a soft understanding that arrives the way sleep arrives, without argument. That what carried us forward was not certainty, it was patience, it was continuity without explanation, it was silence doing its quiet work. Perhaps the ancestor we erased never needed to be restored to a name. Perhaps they needed only time, time long enough for fear to loosen, time long enough for identity to soften, time long enough for us to listen differently. As the procession fades, not away but into the background of being, the stars seem to grow steadier. The darkness no longer feels empty. It feels full in a way that does not demand attention. The chapter begins to close, like a final breath held and then released. You are invited to stop searching, to stop naming, to stop drawing lines where none were meant to last. Instead, rest with this, that the ancestor you thought was lost was never gone, that the silence you feared was never hollow, that the past did not abandon you. It carried you. And now, as sleep draws near, as the body softens and the mind loosens its hold, you may sense it, a quiet companionship, neither heavy nor urgent, just present, patient, breathing. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Tonight there is nothing more to hear, only silence, and within it, everything that brought you here.